The house was quiet in the way houses only become quiet after midnight. Not silent. Never completely silent. The low hum of the refrigerator drifted faintly through the kitchen. Somewhere upstairs, old wood settled inside the walls with soft little clicks that sounded almost like footsteps if you listened too long. Outside the window above the sink, the yard had dissolved into shadow. The bird feeder near the fence was barely visible now. Only a pale shape moving slightly whenever the wind touched it. You had not planned to stay awake this late. Maybe you were rinsing out a coffee mug. Maybe scrolling your phone without really reading anything. Maybe just standing there for no reason at all, staring into the darkness the way people sometimes do when their mind feels heavier at night. And then you heard it. A single cry somewhere beyond the trees. Long, hollow. Almost human for half a second before your brain could place it. You froze without meaning to. The sound came again, farther this time, drifting through the cold air behind the houses at the edge of the neighborhood. Not loud, not aggressive, but something about it reached directly into your chest. The kind of sound your body reacts to before your thoughts catch up. Outside, the wind stopped moving. Even the branches seemed still now. If you have ever heard a sound outside after midnight that made the entire night suddenly feel different, then you already know the feeling. And if you're new here, subscribe before you leave, because what you're about to hear may change the way you listen to the world outside your window forever. Most people think they understand the sounds of the night. Crickets, distant traffic, a dog barking 2 streets away. But certain sounds do something stranger. They don't just interrupt the silence. They reshape it. And what happened next was the moment the night stopped feeling ordinary at all. The cry came a third time. Closer now. Somewhere near the back fence. And this time, you could hear something underneath it that made your stomach tighten before you even understood why. Most people have had a moment like that and never talked about it afterward. A moment where the night suddenly felt aware of you. You hear a sound outside that should be ordinary, just another animal somewhere beyond the trees, and yet something inside you tightens anyway. Your shoulders stiffen. Your breathing changes. You stop what you were doing without even realizing you stopped. And later, when morning comes and everything feels normal again, you convince yourself it was nothing. Just imagination. Just being tired. But your body does not react that way for no reason. Long before human beings had locked doors or street lights or glowing screens in quiet kitchens after midnight, we survived by listening. Not thinking. Listening. A sudden silence in the woods. The crack of movement somewhere unseen. A distant cry carrying through darkness. The nervous system learned to notice these things before language ever existed to explain them. That instinct is still there, buried under modern life, waiting for moments like this to wake up again. And standing there at the sink with the cold light over the stove reflecting faintly against the window glass, that feeling began to settle deeper now. The yard no longer looked familiar. The fence line seemed farther away than it had a minute ago. The trees at the back of the property had become shapes instead of trees. And the strange part was not the sound itself. It was the feeling that something outside had already noticed you listening. But that was only the beginning. Because a few seconds later, something moved near the feeder, and this is where the night started becoming difficult to explain away. At first it looked like nothing more than a darker shape inside the dark. A shadow resting on the top rail of the fence near the feeder. You had probably seen birds there 100 times during the day without thinking twice about it. Cardinals in the morning. Morning doves just before sunset. Small movements that made the yard feel alive and familiar. But this felt different immediately because the shape was completely still. Not resting. Watching. The porch light from 2 houses down barely reached the edge of the yard, but it was enough to catch the outline little by little. Broad shoulders. Rounded head. Feathers. Puffed slightly against the cold air. And then the eyes. Not glowing the way movies pretend they glow. Just reflecting enough light to appear strangely aware for a second before disappearing again into shadow. Most people do not realize how often owls live close to them without ever being seen. A barred owl can remain motionless on the same branch for 20 minutes at a time, blending so perfectly into bark and leaves that your eyes slide past it even when you are looking directly at it. Researchers studying nocturnal bird behavior found that many suburban owls learn the exact routines of neighborhoods over time. They know when porch lights go off. They know which yards stay quiet after midnight. They know where small animals move beneath fences and hedges long before human beings notice anything at all. But the strange part was not that the owl was there. It was the feeling that it had been there longer than you realized. Watching the yard in silence. Watching the house. Maybe even watching you standing there in the kitchen long before that first cry ever broke the night apart. And this is where things started becoming difficult to dismiss as coincidence. There is a reason certain sounds affect human beings differently at night. Researchers who study acoustic psychology have found that the brain becomes significantly more sensitive to unfamiliar frequencies after midnight, especially sounds that resemble distress calls or human vocal patterns. It is part of an ancient survival system. In darkness, your vision weakens, so your nervous system begins listening harder instead. Small sounds feel larger. Distant noises feel closer. And certain animal calls trigger a reaction deep in the body before conscious thought has time to explain anything away. The barred owl is one of the strongest examples of this in North America. Its call does not sound mechanical or musical the way many nighttime insects do. It rises and falls in long, wavering tones that resemble grief more than language. Wildlife researchers have noted for years that people who hear barred owls for the first time often describe the sound the exact same way without prompting. Someone calling out. Someone lost in the dark. Something almost painfully human. Standing there in the kitchen, you could feel that effect happening in real time now. The cry did not just echo through the yard. It changed the emotional shape of the night itself. Even the air inside the house felt different somehow, colder around the windows, quieter in the hallway behind you. And outside, the owl still had not moved from the fence. That was the detail that stayed with you later. Not the sound. The stillness. Predatory birds conserve movement with extraordinary precision. A barred owl can remain motionless for so long that other animals begin reacting to it before human eyes even notice it is there. And suddenly the silence in the yard no longer felt empty. It felt coordinated, as though every living thing outside already understood something you were only beginning to sense. You kept expecting the bird to leave. That was the strange part. Every few seconds your mind waited for the moment it would spread its wings and disappear back into the trees, so the night could return to normal again. But it stayed exactly where it was, balanced on the fence rail near the feeder with that same impossible stillness. The clock on the microwave shifted to 12:24. Then 12:31. Somewhere in the distance a car moved along the highway for a few seconds before fading away again, and after it passed the silence felt even deeper than before. The owl remained there through all of it, watching the yard as though it belonged there more than anything else in the darkness. And slowly, without realizing it, you stopped looking away. There is a moment when fear changes into attention. You begin noticing small details you would normally miss. The pale patterning across the feathers. The slow turn of the head toward the trees whenever something moved beyond the fence line. The way the birds seemed to listen to spaces human ears could not reach. Most people never realize how intimate these moments with wildlife can become because they happen quietly. No announcement. No dramatic event. Just repeated presence. Researchers studying owl behavior discovered that many barred owls return to the same observation perches, night after night for weeks at a time, especially in quiet suburban neighborhoods where the environment remains predictable. The same fence, the same branch, the same corner of the yard. And suddenly you began wondering how many nights this bird had already been there without you noticing. How many times you had walked past the window or turned off the kitchen light while something outside sat silently in the dark, already familiar with the shape of your home. But what happened next made the entire experience feel far more personal than that. The owl finally moved at 12:43. Not suddenly. Not with the dramatic burst people imagine when they think of birds taking flight. It happened so smoothly, it almost felt unreal, like part of the darkness itself had detached from the fence and drifted upward into the trees. One silent sweep across the yard. Then another. The wings made almost no sound at all. That is one of the things scientists still find extraordinary about owls. The leading edges of their feathers are serrated in a way that breaks up turbulence, allowing them to move through the night with a level of silence few other animals on Earth can achieve. You are often being watched by an owl long before you ever hear or see it. And standing there at the window, you suddenly understood how possible that really was. The bird disappeared into the tree line behind the yard, but the feeling did not leave with it. If anything, the silence became heavier afterward, as though the entire neighborhood had shifted into a different state while you were standing there watching. You glanced toward the hallway behind you, toward the dark staircase leading upstairs, then back out into the yard again. Everything looked the same, and yet it did not feel the same anymore. This is the part people rarely talk about after experiences like this. It is not fear exactly. It is awareness. A strange sense that the world around you contains layers you normally move through without noticing. Layers that become visible only during certain moments, usually very quiet ones, usually very late at night. Outside, the branches near the feeder stirred slightly again. Then came another cry from deeper in the trees, farther away now, but somehow sadder than before. And almost immediately after it faded, a light turned on in the house across the street. You stood there watching that single light glowing across the street for a long time. One small kitchen window illuminated in the middle of an otherwise sleeping neighborhood. Maybe someone else had heard the cry too. Maybe someone else had woken suddenly without knowing why. Or maybe it was only coincidence. But something about the timing felt difficult to ignore. Many people who spend enough time listening to the natural world quietly believe there are moments when animals respond to shifts human beings cannot yet explain. Not magic exactly. Not prophecy. Something older and more instinctive than that. Birds react to pressure changes before storms arrive. Deer freeze seconds before earthquakes are felt. Entire flocks can become silent all at once long before a human being notices danger nearby. Nature has always been listening to signals we barely understand. And perhaps human intuition is not as separate from that world as we pretend it is. The strange thing was that you no longer felt alone in the house. Not because of fear, because of awareness. The owl somewhere beyond the trees. The light across the street. The cold stillness pressing softly against the windows. It all felt connected in a way that was impossible to explain logically and yet emotionally undeniable in the moment. Researchers sometimes describe intuition as subconscious pattern recognition. The brain assembling tiny environmental details faster than conscious thought can process them. But standing there after midnight, listening to the fading echo of that cry somewhere beyond the yards and fences, it did not feel clinical or scientific at all. It felt personal, as though the night itself had briefly pulled back a curtain and allowed you to notice something that is usually hidden beneath ordinary life. And then, from somewhere upstairs inside the house, came the soft vibration of a phone against wood. The sound upstairs was not loud, just the soft, uneven vibration of a phone against a wooden nightstand somewhere in the dark. But, after everything that had happened, it seemed to travel through the house differently. You stood still for another second before moving. The kitchen light behind you cast a long shadow down the hallway as you walked toward the stairs, and outside the window the yard remained motionless again, the feeder swaying only slightly in the cold air. Halfway up the staircase you paused, and looked back one last time. The fence rail was empty now. The owl was gone. Yet the feeling it left behind still lingered in the rooms around you like the fading echo of a dream that refuses to fully disappear by morning. Upstairs, the phone screen glowed softly in the dark bedroom. A missed call. Nothing catastrophic. Nothing dramatic. Just a family member from another state unable to sleep, calling late because they had suddenly felt uneasy and wanted to hear a familiar voice before bed. The kind of moment most people would dismiss by sunrise. And maybe they would be right to dismiss it. Maybe the owl was only hunting quietly beyond the trees. Maybe the cry was nothing more than another sound carried through the night air. But standing there in the dim blue light of the phone screen, while the house settled gently around you, something about the timing settled deep inside your chest anyway. Not as fear, not even as certainty, more like recognition. A quiet awareness that human beings are perhaps far more connected to the rhythms of the living world than modern life allows us to notice anymore. Outside, somewhere beyond the sleeping houses, another distant cry drifted softly through the dark. Much farther away this time, almost fading into the wind. By morning the neighborhood looked ordinary again. Early sunlight touched the roofs across the street. A delivery truck rolled slowly past the mailbox clusters at the corner. Somewhere nearby, a lawn sprinkler clicked softly back and forth over damp grass. And at the feeder near the fence, the daytime birds had already returned as though the night had never happened at all. Chickadees moved through the branches in quick, nervous bursts. A mourning dove settled briefly near the flower bed before lifting off again. Everything familiar. Everything normal. But something inside you had shifted quietly during those hours after midnight. and you could feel it even standing there with a cup of coffee warming your hands by the kitchen window. The yard no longer felt empty between bird calls. The silence itself seemed alive now, full of signals, full of things happening just beyond the edge of human attention. Over the next few nights, you found yourself listening differently, pausing when the wind changed direction through the trees, looking toward the fence whenever the darkness became unusually still. And once or twice, long after midnight, you heard that distant cry again somewhere beyond the neighborhood. Softer now, farther away. Yet every time it drifted through the dark, it carried the same strange feeling with it. Not fear. Recognition. Many people believe moments like this are warnings. Others think they are only coincidences wrapped in emotion and sleeplessness. And maybe both explanations are true in their own way. Because the older you get, the more you begin to realize that intuition rarely arrives as a clear answer. More often it arrives as a feeling that settles quietly into your chest before your mind understands why. Maybe that is all the night was trying to tell you. That human beings were never meant to move through the world completely disconnected from the rhythms around them. That somewhere beneath all the noise of modern life, there is still a part of us listening carefully to the living world outside our windows. And perhaps that part has been listening much longer than we realize. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. If stories like this stay with you after the screen fades dark, then subscribe before you leave, because there are still so many quiet things happening out there each night that most people never truly notice. Somewhere outside tonight, beyond a fence line or a dark row of trees, something small and feathered may already be watching the world in silence. And maybe, without fully understanding why, a part of you is listening for it too.